Welcome back to Car-Pinionated, the show where Glenn and I talk about cars. I'm Doug Stewart, senior content producer at Fox 61 in Hartford, and this is Glenn. Glenn, you want to say hi?
Hi.
This is going to be our running joke.
Yes, it is. Hi.
So, Glenn, I wanted to talk to you this week about something that I dearly miss in the American car industry, the car industry in general. And that is what we're maybe call the rise and fall of the American station wagon.
Right.
Not even just American station, but the station wagon, the long roof, the extended sedan. And one of our shows not so long ago back, as one of my dream cars, 1971 Ford Country Squire. It's ridiculous. But I have really fond memories of several different wagons that we had, that other ones that I've lusted after over the years. What made station wagons disappear?
I'm not so sure. This is my theory only, but I'm not so sure they really have. I think they have just morphed. Because we've seen car styles come in and out of vogue. I remember in the 70s the hatchback was like the thing for a period of time, and now hatchbacks are hard to find. We always thought that sedans with the trunk in the back would be the American car, and now we're finding out that they're not. I think that the utility of the station wagon bled directly into the SUV market, which is now dominating everything, because for all intents and purposes, these are just, they're not quite the same long roof, not quite the same kind of cargo area. It's a little bit different, but the idea of having 2 rows of seats and then some storage behind and a roof that goes over that is, that's essentially, we're talking a station wagon. And a lot of it, SUVs today owe everything to station wagons of the past. Many of them are just pretty much a jacked up station wagon, and I get why people like that. When you, even in a small SUV, you still have a better command of the road. You have a better, you're seated higher up, and your visibility is better, and there's a sense of ruggedness and drivability that comes with an SUV that's kind of empowering, and I can see why Americans like them. But for all intents and purposes, our best selling segment in this country is what I call the RAV4 class, which is the now they call it a compact SUV, but it's still a little station wagon when it comes down to it. It's just on a taller platform. So the classic station wagon has pretty much gone away because sedans have as well. But I think it's morphed into something that's definitely useful and really not a bad car option in any way.
I would tend to agree with you. I would add though that with the introduction of the Chrysler product minivans, the Dodge, the Plymouth, and eventually the Chrysler, that kind of knocked station wagons for a loop, because suddenly that became the car that made sense for a lot of people, to get kids in and out of them. And so then you're not selling as many wagons, and at the same time the wagon sales are doing this, and the minivan sales are going this, and then you have then right as minivans are still on the upswing, then you have the SUVs in there, which then really just take the place of the station wagons, which are still dipping downward. So I absolutely agree with you that in form and function, the SUV class take over there. And absolutely. And I think that I don't know. I think that there are still some, and there's some of them we don't get in this country. I think there's a 5 Series BMW wagon. I don't think I'm blanking what they actually call it, but it's not an estate, but it's something like that. That is really, really great. I think we're getting the A6, or we're getting the Allroad, which technically the Audi A6 and the Allroad wagon, which are just fine looking vehicles. They
really are. They really are.
And then my heart beats for a Volvo cross country.
Yeah, yeah,
XC, is it
absolutely, absolutely.
XC90? It's not the 90, it's the XC60.
The XC90 was,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's still around, but and
Yeah.
whatever the variant on the old 850 station wagon was,
Oh
that's the
yeah.
one, yeah. And
Yeah.
boy, the 850 was just about as boxy as they could come, but
Mhm.
man, it was a nice car. I
Yeah.
knew I really didn't know anybody who didn't want to drive one of those and never once thought, oh, wait a minute, it's a station wagon, you know.
Yeah.
It was a cool car.
Yeah.
If I can piggyback on the discussion of the minivan for a moment, I remember distinctly neighbors of ours getting one, and you know, this was the mom's car. It was,
Mhm.
you know, dad had the sedan to go to work, mom was at home with the kids. That was back in the days when you could do that kind of
Right.
thing.
Right.
Um, who can afford it now? But anyways, her big thing was she was petrified of even sitting in this car because it had the word van attached to it. She had had a station wagon forever, and she was just deeply concerned that she was not going to be able to drive this car. And then she drove the car and realized not only was it just as easy as her station wagon drive, she actually preferred it because of that upright driving
Yeah.
position where she had a better command of the road, you know. So here was a station wagon with all the extra room on top, more room for the kids, more room for stuff, and it was easy to drive. In fact, hats off to Chrysler because they made a car that was, you know, it was enjoyable to drive,
Right.
not just
Right.
easy. You know?
Right.
For all intents and purposes, it handled relatively well, you know, for a car of its size. And station
Perfect.
wagons were never known for that, you know.
Right. Right.
Uh,
And so in so many aspects, for a cold product, a product that really didn't have a lot of predecessors. What
right.
Chrysler did with the minivan in '84 was just like they hit so many perfect points. The seating position, the size, the engine, you know, the front wheel drive layout, the fact that you
Hmm.
put it on an existing K car chassis,
Right.
you know, all
Right.
those things. Like, I don't know, is, you know, there's maybe aside from the Mustang, there has been a product, an automotive product that just nails it out of the
Right.
box. And
Right.
yeah, when you think about it, maybe the, you know, maybe the original Jeep Cherokee, maybe there are some, but
Sure.
I think the minivan stands right up there with the Mustang in terms of what they figured out right out of the box.
Sure.
And you
Absolutely.
have the same, you know, the same Lee Iacocca Genesis for both of those vehicles,
Yeah.
interestingly enough. I
Right.
remember when I worked for the car rental company in the early mid 80s, and Chrysler didn't know what they had. And we had they wanted us to buy some when they first came out. And they were doing, I don't remember specifics, but they were doing deep discounts before
Yeah.
before they really hit the market.
Hmm.
And like 6 months later, you couldn't have them for MSRP. You were paying above MSRP.
Right.
And you know, it was a while before any other manufacturer, you know, said, "Hey, that's the formula," you know, and they just never got, you know, Ford Aerostar, odd looking
Hmm.
vehicle. Some people love it. Um,
Yeah.
you know, but it just, you know, it was a, you know, rear wheel drive. I think it was based on I think it's based on the Ranger. I think
Yeah.
I stand to be corrected. And then you know, the GM vans, you know, of
Mhm.
the Astro, and was that the
The
Safari?
silhouette. The silhouette from
Well,
Olds.
no, I'm thinking the first ones.
Oh,
Then you go to the Dustbuster ones.
yes.
But
Right. Right.
yeah,
Okay.
but
Thank you.
any case, where this is not a
Right.
discussion of minivans, but you know, it's just interesting that all that kind of how the coincides. But
Sure.
you know, we had a '62 Chevy Biscayne station wagon, and
Mm.
here's the charming photo that I'll put here of me standing in front of it. And it was a, you know, it was three on the tree, and you know, I think my father had to put seatbelts in it, you know, uh, all this stuff. But like that got us all over the place, you know,
Sure. Sure.
from here to, there, on
Yep.
vacation and everything. And then we replaced that with a 66 Ford Ranch wagon, which a much nicer blue. I think it was one of our first cars that may have been the first car we had with an automatic transmission. And
Wow.
then, then you'd have the sand chair in the way back, and somebody called way back on the way there, way back on the way back. And the sand chair would like move all over, took a corner,
Of
and,
course. Of
and,
course.
go ahead.
I feel like I spent half my childhood in the way back of the station wagon because that's where there were no seatbelts. It was completely dangerous, but we didn't know, but we turned out fine, but we were lucky. I remember it was it was a Kingswood station wagon.
Wow.
Who made that? Chevy?
Chevy. That was
Chevy.
Basically the Caprice.
Our neighbors had one, and it actually had in the way back under the floor a seat that flipped up and you faced backwards. Yeah. That was the coolest thing when I was a kid. Of course, I was like 7 years old, but that was cool. That was very cool.
Was that one of the, so like in 71 they had the clamshell where the window went up?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It had sort of rounded glass at the back.
Very rounded, yeah. Because they were trying. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that there's a filtering down. There's a genesis here of these ideas, dripping down and filtering into other markets. I mean, the station wagon to the minivan, and then the minivan to the SUV is a clear line, Yeah. And honestly, what eventually happened with the minivan is that they became uncool because it was something
very uncool.
Yeah, very, very. I mean, it became a real family vehicle, and it was just suddenly, wait, you're driving what? And that bleeds into the cars that your typical American dad wants to drive, and that became the SUV. If I can sidebar for a second, Car and Driver a couple years ago tested the larger, I guess they call them mid-size, but they're larger SUVs on the market today. The Volvo, the T90, Audi Q7. So these were upper end, larger vehicles that they liked, and they entitled the article "Chariots of the Dads," which I think is insanely clever because that's. You need a car with 3 rows to handle the kids, but you don't want to drive anything boring,
Right.
And that's a new niche in the market. It really is. Right. And it's all derivative of our friend, the station wagon.
Yeah. And I think that, I think I like SUVs, don't get me wrong, but I think there's something about the lower profile of the wagon that that the long side view that
so really, tell me your favorites.
Okay, so I was 71 Ford Country Squire. I would say the sometimes called the Power Wagon from Cadillac, the CTSV Sport Wagon. Just that's a sharp car. It looks like it's powerful, and I always liked the CTSV anyway, and then just to see that bring it up to the next level. I have a fondness for, you mentioned the 850. I have a fondness for the Volvo 750 wagon. That was always very same thing, very linear, very the lines are drawn very clearly, and not as boxy as every Volvo that came before it. I would say I mentioned the Audi wagons before. There's a Audi wagon, small Audi Quattro that was actually literally built by Porsche, and I think those are wicked fun. And then going back to Ford, the Wagon Master, which is what they call themselves, that last Country Squire. Whatever year it was before the Crown Vic turned very rounded, which is a fine looking vehicle, but they didn't bring the station wagon over. But those last square squared off country Squires were just beautiful.
Yeah.
Just,
Yeah.
and I fully admit that I'm weird about cars sometimes. But what were your favorites?
Well, I'm more of a fan of the modern station wagon, specifically where the Germans took it. But if I had to go back to like the classic station wagons of old, look up the 1955 Chevy Bel Air Nomad. It was a
Oh,
two-door station wagon,
yeah.
and I love this car because even back then Chevy knew that they were mixing genres there, that
Yeah.
it was sporty because it had the two doors, but it
Yeah.
was still a station wagon, and it was just, that's a cool old station wagon. I
Yeah.
think if you're looking for something that screams classic station wagon, and and classic in many ways, this is the car to look at. It's
Yeah.
just, it's everything from that era that I think was right about a station wagon, and it's cool.
Yeah.
Uh,
Did
but
do you remember seeing those? I remember seeing those.
I
There weren't a
remember
lot.
only seeing them as restored. I've seen one or two, but that was before our time,
Right.
obviously. So I mean, I was born in '62, so our station wagons were around 1970, and they were all just big, sort of anonymous boats. We had a Plymouth Volare station wagon. Boy, what a hunk of junk.
Oh
What a
yeah.
hunk of junk.
Oh
It was
yeah.
the car that if you turned the wheel too far in one direction, it would stall. The car would stall. Somebody in the comments, please explain to somebody, me, who doesn't know that much about engineering, how a steering wheel, if you crank it too far to the right or left, can cause a car to stall. But they did this. They all did this. We had we had a Ford Torino station wagon,
Oh.
and it
Oh.
was big. It
Yeah.
was big. But the one thing I will say about that car is it had a V8. It was
Yeah.
totally innocuous looking. It was sort of a light yellow with a tint of green color that was really not terribly attractive on any car, but that's what it was. But this car had a V8 under the hood that was the size of a small mountain range. It was huge. And my mother loved this car because she would fire it up. And by the time we got to the bottom of our street, the car would already be pumping out warm air in the middle of winter. So, these things had a purpose, right? But
Yep.
I would jump forward and I would say, like, a seminal station wagon for me, when we're talking about the trickle down from the wagon into other styles of cars. And we sort of mentioned this one before, but the 1999 Audi Allroad, which was a
Oh
station
yeah.
wagon based on the A6. Now, the
Yeah.
A6 sedan, the original A6, was a gorgeous car to begin with. I mean, that and the A4 Audi just knocked out of the park. They just did a great job with it. Then they took the station wagon version of the A6 and they introduced the Allroad, which had different cladding on it, all-wheel drive, and they boosted it up a little bit off the
Yeah.
ground. And the
Just a little
idea
bit.
was, yeah, just a little, but they wanted to give that impression that you could take the car off road and do more adventurous things. And they aimed it at the dads out there, I think,
Yeah.
more than anybody else. And it's just, not only was it an attractive car, but it was rugged, and just it just looked the part. And I remember, if I had the money back then, I would have bought one immediately, but they were really price
They
prohibitive.
were very expensive.
They
Yeah.
were very expensive, yeah. And I was young at that point in time. I definitely didn't have the money. But what a gorgeous car. I mean, and that's kind of from the heyday of Audi. They were really around the 2000 mark. They were really on top of their game, in the styling department. And if we're going to talk wagons, I had a 2006 Audi A3, which is technically a
Oh
hatchback, but
yeah.
it looked like a little station wagon. And boy, what a sharp little car! And I mean, that the underpinnings of that were very close to the GTI. So I mean, it was Audi's version of the
Yeah.
GTI.
Yeah. It's the same platform. Yep.
Terrific little car,
Yeah.
blisteringly fast. My only gripe about that was that the 2.0 T engine used to just drink oil. It didn't burn it. It ran so hot it evaporated it. And we were constantly putting oil. And I was like in a panic because I'm like, oh my God, my car's burning oil. And then I took it into an Audi dealership and they're like, the 2.0 does that. Everybody knows this. And I was like, I feel better. Anyways,
yeah.
I digress.
Thanks for engineering that in there.
Right. Thanks. Yeah. The 1989 BMW 5 Series and 3 Series wagons were both really sharp. Look those up. And last but not least, we owned a 2006 Chrysler Pacifica. Now, this is not the current Pacifica, which is a minivan. Okay. Right. They scrapped the old car and took the nameplate and put it on a minivan. The old Pacifica was, I think, one of the last real station wagons.
Yep.
It wasn't an SUV. It wasn't quite that tall. It was somewhere in between, but boy, it was a good car. We used to call that car the big guy who knows how to dance, because it was a big, heavy car, but boy, it had moves. And it had a third row that was honest to God comfortable. People enjoyed riding in the third row of the Pacifica. Yeah, you didn't have a lot of storage once you put that seat up, but it was a good car. It was really, hats off to Chrysler. They did a nice job with it. So those are my favorites.
Okay. Yeah, I just think that it's an experience that a lot of people won't have.
Yeah,
like one of those things. It's like just I've looked at the ads for the old wagons on YouTube, and you can put a 4x8 sheet of plywood in there. Mm-hmm. They were passing out 4x8 sheets of plywood like to every American who had a house, apparently, because every wagon needed to fit it. And that was like the standard unit of measurement that you could fit that. But they did. I mean, I remember putting those, sheetrock. It was sheetrock. It wasn't plywood. It was sheetrock. With my dad, putting it into the back of the wagon and bringing it home.
Sure.
My father also had a thing about wouldn't want the factory roof rack, because that wasn't going to hold up. That wasn't going to hold up. It's just for show. And so he had to make sure that he had his roof rack that was made out of whatever, but it had these big suction cups. Oh my God. Yeah. I would just love to go back in time and observe my father packing things, because he had a way, this was a specific way he had to do it. But anyway, all right. Anything else on wagons that we didn't get to?
I think that about does it. It's nice that we eventually morphed out of that big boatsy, steering wheel, let's see, like that big, and that boatsy feel. My mom was never that much of a driver. She, very utilitarian, just she never really enjoyed driving. But years after, we empty nested, my dad got her a new car, and that turned out to be an Infiniti G20, which was actually the engine that Nissan was using in the SER, which was the sporty version of the Sentra. Really good little engine, good little car, kind of innocuous. But my mom's big take on having this little 4-door trunk back station wagon was, she called me up and she's like, I've been driving around the Infiniti and it's weird. And I said, what do you mean? She goes, well, I swear to God, I can feel the road in the steering wheel. And it was the first time for her, because old station wagons definitely did not have what we call road feel, and she ended up loving it. She was like, well, I tell this car to turn and it turns. I don't have to crank the wheel 5 times. And I'm like, there it is, So, it was an epiphany for her.
Yeah. And it's weird when you have somebody who's used to not handling a car, that all of a sudden, like, wait a minute, this is fun.
Sure.
I like shifting my own gears now.
Right. There you go. Right.
Yeah. All right. That wraps it up for another episode of Car-Pinionated. And we'll be back next week to talk about more car stuff. All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.